the XDefiant open beta has been here for a bit, and with today being the technical last day pending no extension, which I'd be all for, but I'm not really expecting it, I wanted to give a bit of feedback through my playtime, the pros, cons, and all of what I liked, what I didn't, and where I hope this game goes in the near future for the full launch. As we go along, drop your thoughts down below. Have you enjoyed your time with XDefiant so far? Whatever the case, drop your thoughts below, but if you enjoyed the video, you found it at all insightful, do me a favor and drop a like on it, and if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing to stay updated with all things XDefiant, Modern Warfare, and other FPS content here on the channel. I'd love to have you. And finally, make sure to check out my friends over at GFuel for 30% off certain items like the Hype Sauce tubs in the month of June, as well as starter kits, but more on that in a bit. For now, let's jump into my sort of feedback and review for the XDefiant open beta. Firstly, I want to start out with the pros, the things that I liked about the game that I thought was good. Firstly, it's free to play. Now, that also can be a con to some people, and we'll touch on that a little bit later, but the free to play aspect is definitely nice here, I think. Having absolutely no barrier of entry that any player can download it, try it out, and if they don't like it, well, they don't really lose out on anything other than a couple of hours of playtime they may have put in. Whereas if you have a $60 game, $70 game, you have that price barrier where even if you don't like it, well, sorry, you're out of luck, you're out of that money. And of course, with it being free to play, that also means that it's way more accessible to everybody. So you're gonna be able to play with more friends, you're gonna be able to introduce more people to the game, all things like that, which I think is great for growing a game, something that XDefiant right now seems to really be trying to do, to cultivate this community and grow it organically, which I think is great. Now, beyond that, it's a great breath of fresh air, I think, as an arcade shooter. Call of Duty has, in recent years, been sort of a deviation of itself. Being an arcade shooter of the past, we've seen things take a more tactical turn in recent Infinity Ward titles, and depending on how you feel, the other games as well. Black Ops Cold War probably being the last sort of true arcade shooter, if you want to call it that, but it does feel like those games of old. A Twitch shooter, something that is fast-paced, has good gunplay, and all things that go along with that, but it's a nice breath of fresh air introduced into the gaming scene right now, where it's new, but it feels familiar, and I think that's definitely something that we can all kind of get behind. Now, before we jump into some gameplay stuff, the last thing that I want to touch on is kind of a top-down perspective here of the open beta. This is going to be something that's a beta exclusive pro, but all weapons right now are unlocked. All attachments are unlocked. Everything is unlocked that you can try out anything that you want without having to progress through ranks. When the game fully launches, of course, we are going to have a set progression system, but right now it's open for you to try absolutely anything you want, which is great because we, of course, have seen betas, even with the XDefiant beta in the closed beta that we saw, where there was a progression where if you didn't have a whole ton of time, you couldn't just hop on and play a couple of games and use those best weapons. But if you want to in this, you can. You can experiment with anything in the game as a sort of demo for everything in the game. I really enjoyed that. Now, firstly, jumping into the actual games itself, well, firstly, matches can be found immediately. After the matchmaking issues that really started with the first day of the open beta, and then when it was open to everybody, not that early access period, there was a little bit here with matchmaking that didn't make it easy to find matches at some points. But now going through the entirety of this open beta, towards the tail end here, it is very easy to find a match, I think. Almost instantaneous, which is definitely nice, so you're not waiting too long for match queues or anything like that. The weaponry, it's definitely something, the weapons, I think that when they're on, they're on. Now, there's stuff we'll touch on in terms of like Hitreg and Netcode still that I definitely think still needs to be ironed out. So there are absolutely a ton of situations where it doesn't feel like you're getting all the potential out of your weapon. But if your connection's good, if you're getting that netcode and it's working well for you, man, you are frying if you're accurate. And that's something that's definitely nice, awarding that accuracy of the Twitch arcade shooter. Now, abilities is something that I think is hit or miss depending on who you ask. Personally, I don't mind it too much. It almost reminds me a bit of Black Ops 3, Black Ops 4 in that Call of Duty sense, where that still was, to a degree, the arcade shooter that we had for Call of Duty, and in that sort of mold for what Call of Duty was previously. We didn't really start deviating into more of a casual milsim based approach like some of the design goes for in recent games, but again, it makes it kind of familiar. I definitely think there's a nice wide range of abilities you have here on offer. I think that some of them are very well balanced, others not so much, which we'll get to in a second, but it's definitely something that, again, is a pro or con depending on who you ask. Maps, I honestly really love the amount that we have to work with in the beta. Through the escort and progression based game modes that we have to things like domination, you have a lot to play with in this beta, and I really enjoy that. I'm excited that we're seeing so much here up front, and with the full launch of the game, I really enjoy that. Plus, leading into the next point here with that, the maps themselves are pretty aesthetically pleasing if you ask me. I'm a huge fan of like color theory and stuff like that, so with these XDefiant maps, you have a bunch of maps that play directly into just an incredibly vibrant playstyle and world alongside that. So being that color theory nerd here, seeing those bright colors, those things that catch your eye, it's something that is subliminally pulling you back back in and makes you remember those certain aspects of the game. So I really enjoy the maps that we have on offer so far. For the most part, I think they've got good flow. I think the design itself doesn't take itself too seriously, and it's just been fun to play around with, I think. The final thing that I'll touch on here, and of course, there's probably so much that I'm going to miss, not only just in the pros, but also in the cons when we get to those. The last thing that I want to touch on that I definitely want to stress on is the practice zone. I said it before, it is what Call of Duty's firing range should have been. Like, it's embarrassing by comparison that this game is in beta and has an offering for a firing range, a target practice, spray pattern areas, abilities and ultimate testing, combat dummies and everything like that, a shooting range and course. Dude, there's so much that goes into this that when you look at Modern Warfare 2's singular hallway with 3 dummies, you're just like, there's no way this actually took 3 years to make, right? Like, this was 100% an afterthought that was added in the final hours of the game's development, right? It has to be. The practice zone actually might be my favorite practice zone that we've seen in an FPS game in recent years. Haven't been able to play too much of Apex as of recently. Their recent rework to their practice zone is on paper pretty solid as well. The finals, when that was in beta and available, that was something that the practice zone there had a decent offering, but again, it wasn't as in-depth as XDefiant. And of course, well, Call of Duty's, again, just like we said, a little embarrassing that that's all that we had by comparison. But anyways, that's some of the pros here that I really enjoyed out of XDefiant and the open beta here at this. But before I jump over into the cons and some of the things that I think definitely need some work, check out my friends over at GFuel for 20% off all items all the time with code Espresso, but 30% off for the month of June on tubs of hype sauce, hibiscus tea, MS melon, and more, as well as starter kits. So if you haven't tried GFuel before, now is as best a time as any because you can get those starter kits at an up discount here with code Espresso. If you guys would like to grab a restock, try something out for the very first time, now's the best time to try it out. But that said, if you're interested, links in the description below, and use code Espresso for 20% off all the time. But again, 30% off on certain items in June. But back to it, let's talk about the cons here, the stuff that I'm not really a fan of with XDefiant so far. Firstly, and I gotta say, some of these here up front we'll touch on were bigger issues, absolutely, but fingers crossed should be ironed out by the time the full game actually launches. Number 1, Hitreg. This is one that seems to be incredibly hit or miss, like quite literally. No pun really intended on that one, but personally, I didn't find too many bad gunfights. There were definitely situations where I thought, okay, maybe I should have hit 1 or 2 more shots here at that, but I've seen clips where it's undeniable how bad the hit reg is for some players, where they're unloading a magazine into a player on target and they're getting like every 5 shots to register. So there absolutely is a lot of work that can be done here with the hit reg and the networking, the netcode, and all that goes into that. So that is undeniable. I'm never going to say that that was perfect here because it wasn't. It really needs some work, and fingers crossed that's something that can get ironed out for the full launch of the game. I mean, we saw with the closed beta that there was that update to the netcode to the hit reg, but clearly it wasn't as good a state as they thought whenever they deployed this change. So fingers crossed that if the next time we get to play the game is the launch of the game, fingers crossed it's fixed out by then, or maybe we get another open beta to supplement that here next month sometime perhaps. Fingers crossed, whenever we get to see it next, though, it is ironed out further. Party matchmaking for a decent chunk of this short little open beta was also broken, where you could not join friends. I'm pretty sure that the cross-platform party matchmaking still is broken and will not work here for this open beta. That's something that definitely needs to be worked out as well. Definitely need to be able to play with your friends, and the fact that we have not been able to this entire time is, I don't want to say a bit worrying, but it's kind of worrying in that sense. So I don't want to dwell too much on that. It is something that they are aware of. They are working on it. So that's stuff, though, that has absolutely affected this particular playtest. Now, additionally, the movement in this open beta just, it seems off. And I might be crazy on that one. I've heard a lot of discussion here about that. I think it's even something that is a known issue where Mark Rubin did comment on it. But it seems like the body movement with your left stick is different by comparison to the closed beta, and then also earlier in previous insider sessions even before that, where something just, I don't know what, feels off. And I also feel like that plays a part into some of your aiming mechanic as well, where there are definitely some situations where I'm like, I am 100% on target, but then my aim just goes nowhere. But then some slight adjustments in terms of my left stick as well, it's just immediately on. I don't know if that's something that deals with aim assist mixed in with that movement change or what the case may be, but there's definitely something that feels off. And I don't know if you guys feel that as well, but for me, absolutely feel like that's the case. Additionally, I felt like some of the abilities should have been adjusted a little bit further. The closed beta really showcased some of the abilities that kind of thrived and became air quote meta, the main chosen ones, and there were some that were definitely corny, but some, they stayed corny through the closed beta into the open beta here at this. The one that I cannot stand, the first day was the worst with it. I actually kind of felt like it tailed off a little bit in my play sessions, but the spider drone was absolutely nuts. I mean, that takes your health down, covers your entire screen for like 5 seconds, where you're just kind of like, all right, guess I'll die then. The cleaner's entire faction, I think, could use a little bit of a, I don't know if rework is the best way to do it, but fine tuning for sure. I mean, the incendiary rounds as a passive is kind of nuts. I mean, anytime you shoot a gun, yes, it is going to be something where it doesn't do as much damage over range initially, but that incendiary rounds and damage that continues after landing is something that led to a lot of trading scenarios, which I wasn't a huge fan of. But I mean, if they don't want to do anything about it, I guess I understand. It's just going to be a part of the game, but kind of found that frustrating. On the cleaners as well, the purifier being a one hit to semi-nuts kind of ranges is a little frustrating as well. Like, I thought I was well out of the range of being touched by that thing. I was shooting an ACR at him and I just got like breathed on by that. The winds just took the fire and just took me out in one hit. So it was an immediate death, which I wasn't a fan of, but hoping to see some abilities ironed out further as well. Spawns absolutely need some work. Domination is something that there are plenty of times I thought, okay, we're gonna flip them, right? Then we didn't. But then also times where I was on the receiving end of that, where players were just straight up in our spawn, and I was like, how am I spawning into gunfights? I thought we were gonna be different from Call of Duty. But I mean, jokes aside, spawns absolutely something that definitely needs work. They're always going to need work, though. I think we're gonna see continual updates on that as time goes further. But I mean, with that kind of stuff, that is absolutely something that the open beta is for, that to get that feedback, to get that data set of, okay, this map spawns could end up using some adjustments. If there's a triple cap, this spawn point for whatever reason is sticky, we need to fix that. So that's something that I think will be relatively easier in the grand scheme of things, but I mean, we'll see how it all works out. And the final thing off the top of my head, again, I know that I'm going to forget a ton of stuff here, so if you have anything you'd like to add to these lists, feel free to drop it down below. The only thing that I want to really add here is the potential for cheaters. I'm very much so hoping that we see some sort of anti-cheat for XDefiant, because I mean, I've seen clips of it already in the beta. I didn't experience any personally for myself. There was a weird bug. I don't know if it was a cheater or if it was a bug where somebody's player glitched out, but there was a player under the ground in the middle of Noodleplex. They were kind of AFK, so again, that's why I kind of think it might have been a glitch with like a player that was AFK or being DC'd, as opposed to somebody that was underneath the ground shooting up, because we didn't get shot at that entire time. And then a couple of minutes later, I didn't see them. So, I mean, I don't know if that was the case, but I've also seen clips of actual cheaters in the beta as well, which just leads back into that free-to-play thing. While it's nice that you have access to anybody being able to play the game, there is no real barrier here to stop cheaters if you don't have an anti-cheat, where you don't have hardware ID bans or something like that. Because if you get banned on an account, and okay, the cheater can make another account in 5 minutes, they can continue trolling. So that's something that hopefully we end up seeing some sort of anti-cheat with XDefiant. I don't think that we've seen anything detailed about that just yet, but that's where I'm at with that. But that's the pros and cons. The final thing I want to touch on here at this is just an overall sentiment of the open beta itself. I had, in my opinion, a lot of fun playing with it. Again, it was a breath of fresh air and a deviation from Call of Duty, which it's no secret I have not been a huge fan of this past year, how Infinity Ward is handling the game, some of the changes we've seen made. It just seems almost like, as a longtime fan, to be somebody in those positions where I'm at those capture sessions like COD Next, and they ask explicitly for our feedback, and then they're like, okay, well, we're not going to implement any of that. I feel almost like, as a fan and as a player, disrespected in that regard. So it's been nice to take a step back to create content not on Call of Duty, and to, for the first time in years, actually end up creatively having some different avenues to play around with and to enjoy the game that we're playing with at the same time. It's just a double whammy in that sense, where I'm really happy with what we have. And that's just me. Again, honeymoon phase, absolutely. It's just a combination of like being creatively liberated in that sense and having something new to play around with, and also seeing some success off that, which thank you guys for that. You guys have been killing it with the support here on the XDefiant videos, and I can't thank you guys enough for that. But the big thing that I want to touch on here in regards to, yes, I'm enjoying this, is will this be the COD killer? No. Not at all, and we have to stop saying it will be, because at that point, that's what makes the games doomed to fail. If you put so much high expectations that you put a brand new free-to-play game that is a smaller team by comparison up against the Goliath that is Call of Duty, you're just setting expectations way too high and then going to crush yourselves in the feeling and sentiment of it in game overall. At least that's how I see it. I mean, even Mark Rubin, executive producer at Ubisoft working on XDefiant, says that this is not their aim. They're not trying to be a COD killer. They're just trying to make a game that is an homage to the classic arcade shooter here at this, and making something that's fun for everybody. And I think that's how we should approach this altogether, is we should see this as a unique opportunity to have a classic feeling game reintroduced here in 2023, where it's something that, yeah, maybe it is a lot of fun, but play it as it is. Don't try and hold it to too high of expectations, because when the developers are not trying to kill Call of Duty, that's obviously going to translate down to, well, the fans are going to see it's not going to kill Call of Duty. So play the game if you enjoy it. Don't look at it and try and compare it to anything else, because I think ultimately you're going to end up seeing some different failures in some areas versus others, or some very great successes. But if you take those as standalone, I think you'll just enjoy the game a lot more by itself. But anyways, that's my take on it here. That is my review of the open beta so far. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right. Let me know your thoughts down below. If you agree, that's awesome. If you don't, that's awesome too. That's the beauty of gaming. You're allowed to enjoy what you want. But anyways, that's what we're gonna call it. So let me know your thoughts down below. Agree, disagree, liking the beta, not so much. Whatever the case, drop your thoughts below. If you enjoyed the video, you find it out insightful, do me a favor and drop a like on it. And if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing to stay updated with all things XDefiant, Modern Warfare, other FPS content here on the channel. I'd love to have you in the community. But for now, thanks so much for watching. My name is Espresso. I'll see you later. Take care and peace.